The biggest gamble in cinema history. A conference room in Manhattan, fluorescent light, boardroom silence. Marvel Entertainment executives stare at financial projections that look like obituaries. Their heroes, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, aren't cultural icons. They are intellectual assets collecting dust. Marvel has no studio, no backing, no credibility. So they do something unthinkable. They mortgage their crown jewels. Thor, Captain America, Ant-Man, Nick Fury. Everything that would one day define pop culture was signed away as collateral for a loan. A $525 million loan. A number large enough to build an empire or bury one. The terms are brutal. If the first movie fails, Marvel loses everything. They don't just risk bankruptcy, they forfeit their characters forever. The very heroes children would grow up idolizing.
If the first movie fails, Marvel loses everything. They don't just risk bankruptcy, they forfeit their characters forever. The very heroes children would grow up idolizing. So who do they choose to lead this cinematic resurrection? A safe star? A proven box office draw? A clean, reliable, insurable icon? No. They choose the man Hollywood had already buried. The addict, the inmate, the ghost with the ruined reputation. Robert Downey Jr. The press thought it was madness. Executives thought it was suicide. The industry laughed. You are betting $500 million on the world's greatest liability? But Jon Favreau, a director without power, whispered a blasphemy. Downey isn't risk. Downey is Tony Stark.
Marvel didn't see a genius. They saw disaster. And yet, somewhere between desperation and prophecy, the studio signed him. Iron Man wasn't built on confidence. It was forged out of panic. This wasn't just a casting. It was a casino move. All chips pushed forward. One card face down. One man whose failure could erase an entire universe. And so the thesis lands. To save the heroes the world would one day worship, Marvel gambled everything on a recovering addict. The biggest cinematic empire in history was built on a man Hollywood had already thrown away. This is not a comeback story. This is the resurrection. And resurrection always begins with a burial. Hollywood mythology says stars are chosen. The truth is darker. Sometimes they fight their way in through a burning door. Marvel headquarters. Not the glass palace it would become, but a mid-budget office with carpet stains, flickering lights, and executives terrified that their $500 million gamble might kill the company. At the center of the storm stood Jon Favreau. Not yet a household name, just a director with a crazy conviction. Downey isn't pretending to be Tony Stark, he is Tony Stark. Across from him sat Marvel CEO Ike Perlmutter, infamous for cutting costs so aggressively he rationed paper clips. He didn't see Tony Stark, he saw a disaster. He slammed his hand on the table. We are not hiring a drug addict. He is uninsurable.
Executives nodded. Agents whispered, "Why fight for a man who destroys everything he touches?" Disney, soon to own Marvel, warned that casting Downey could taint the brand before it even existed. But Favreau refused to blink, so he pulled a trick. He secured an unofficial screen test, not through corporate channels, but through the back door. A spare stage, a borrowed camera, just Favreau, Downey, and a few skeptical studio reps. Downey walks into the room. No swagger, no armor, just the coiled energy of a man who knows this might be his last shot. He sits. Favreau nods. Be Tony. Don't act Tony. Downey doesn't rehearse, he inhabits. The arrogance, the self-loathing, the restless intelligence. The billion-dollar grin hiding a cracked childhood. He improvises lines, he rewires dialogue. He reshapes Stark into a paradox, a man desperately performing genius while afraid to be alone. Then it happens.
He finishes the scene, stands up, adjusts his tie, and casually murmurs, "If I don't get this job, it's gonna be a problem for me." Somehow tragic, hilarious, and terrifying all at once. He walks out. Silence. Executives aren't cheering. They are stunned. Jeff Bridges later said, watching that tape, "We didn't hire him to play Tony Stark. We hired him because he was Tony Stark." Favreau finally had his ammunition. Downey wasn't a risk. He was the only option. But there was a final twist. Marvel agreed to cast him, but offered almost no money and no guarantee. Downey accepted instantly. He wasn't negotiating wealth. He was betting his resurrection. And filming hadn't even begun yet. The real gamble was about to start. Chaos wasn't the obstacle. It became the engine. Day one on set. Jeff Bridges, a legend, walks into rehearsal holding a neatly annotated script. Robert Downey Jr. doesn't bring one. He looks at Jeff, grins, "Oh, we're not using that." Jeff blinks, confused, because there was no finished script. Marvel had rushed development so brutally, entire scenes were blank or rewritten daily. Jeff later admitted, "I signed on to a $140 million movie that didn't have a script." For most actors, this would be catastrophe. For Downey, it was oxygen. Years of chaos had trained him in instability. Addiction had made him improvisational. Prison had made him adaptive. He didn't survive unpredictability. He thrived in it. So Downey began rewriting Tony Stark in real time. He hid snacks around the set, pulling out blueberries mid-scene because Tony Stark would snack arrogantly. He adjusted his sunglasses, making Stark look like a man hiding behind armor. He changed lines, arguing that Tony's wit wasn't scripted, it was instinct. Jeff Bridges was furious at first. He had prepared, trained, memorized, and now the script was dissolving on camera. He vented to Favreau. "How do we do this without the lines?" Favreau smiled. "Relax, we're making a $140 million indie film." Downey wasn't just acting Tony Stark. He was building Tony Stark, one impulsive moment at a time. There is a moment that proves it, the finale. Tony Stark steps in front of the press and reads his speech. Originally written as denial, "I am not Iron Man." Downey pauses, smirks, and improvises, "I am Iron Man." Favreau didn't say cut. The cast froze. The crew leaned in. He had just rewritten the ending and rewired cinematic history. Marvel executives panicked. This line destroyed their planned secrecy strategy. But the audience testing sessions, they erupted. The line became the thesis of the MCU. Identity revealed, not hidden. Humanity over myth. A flawed man stepping into responsibility. Downey changed filmmaking with a sentence. And that scene, improvised, reckless, electric, cemented Tony Stark as not a superhero archetype, but a confession. The movie wrapped. Executives still weren't convinced. They feared the gamble had backfired. But something was brewing. Marvel thought they hired an unstable wild card. What they didn't realize was they had just created an unstoppable worker. And work, not drugs, was about to become his new addiction. He didn't replace addiction, he relocated it. Iron Man didn't heal him, it terrified him. Because addicts don't trust good things. Good things feel temporary, fragile, undeserved. The moment Iron Man exploded, Robert Downey Jr. didn't celebrate. He panicked. What if this was luck? What if they find out I'm a fraud? What if the old me comes back? So he did what addicts do. He chased a new high, work. 2007 to 2009 became a blur. Tropic Thunder, Ben Stiller called. A controversial comedy. Downey plays a method actor who plays a black character. It was a career suicide risk. Studio lawyers begged him not to do it. Executives warned, this could destroy you again. But Downey understood something Hollywood had forgotten. Comedy wasn't about safety. It was about truth. He dove into the role. Research obsessive, accent perfect, no irony, all commitment. People expected backlash. What they got? An Oscar nomination. Not for drama, for comedy. But success didn't calm him. It fed the hunger. Sherlock Holmes. Guy Ritchie approached next. A Victorian detective, addictive intellect, chaotic energy, emotionally broken genius. Sound familiar? Downey built Sherlock the way he built Stark, fast-talking, unpredictable, childish, and brilliant. He trained obsessively, bare-knuckle boxing, physical stunts, sleep reduction schedule. 3 movies shot back-to-back, no rest, no space. He once said, "Work became the drug that wouldn't kill me." But that isn't triumph, it's confession. Robert wasn't celebrating success. He was running from silence, because silence meant reflection. Reflection meant remembering. Remembering meant pain. So he stacked films: Iron Man, Sherlock, Tropic Thunder, Due Date, Iron Man 2. Set after set, press tour after press tour, script meeting, stunt rehearsal, reshoot, plane, hotel, camera. Sleep was optional. Decompression was impossible. He became a machine. Friends noticed. He didn't know how to be still. Addiction hadn't vanished, it had mutated. Hollywood misread it as dedication. It was fear. Fear that if he slowed down, the industry would remember who he used to be. If he rested, the cravings might return. If he stopped proving his worth, he would lose the miracle woman who finally believed in him. He wasn't working to stay famous, he was working to stay alive. And that transformation from unstable actor to unstoppable force made something else happen. On the next film, he would become more than a star. He would become the center of gravity for an entire cinematic universe. He wasn't the strongest Avenger. He was the gravity. By 2011, Marvel was assembling something unprecedented, a shared universe, multiple stars, egos, insecurities, contracts, and expectations colliding, 6 lead actors, 5 franchises, 1 room, and every studio executive was terrified the experiment would implode. Then something unexpected happened. When Downey walked in, the room stabilized, not because of power, but presence. On the set of The Avengers, Downey was the only one with perks, the biggest trailer, the highest pay, the longest history. But what no one expected was this. He didn't protect his spot, he protected everyone else's. The first table read, a tense rehearsal room in Albuquerque. Chris Hemsworth, newly famous. Chris Evans, quiet, uncertain. Mark Ruffalo, replacing Ed Norton. Scarlett and Renner, waiting to see if this universe even works. The energy was awkward. Then Downey spoke first. "Let's just have fun. We're all here because nobody thought this would work." The room cracked open. He complimented lines, elevated others, diffused tension with jokes. Suddenly, actors who thought this was a competition realized this was a team. But leadership wasn't charisma, it was advocacy. Marvel treated Downey differently. First class, everything, far more pay. Downey noticed, and it bothered him. During the shooting of The Avengers, he invited the cast to his house. Not for parties, but dinners where they would decompress, talk, bond. He looked at their contracts. He did the unthinkable. He went to Marvel and argued that the entire cast be paid more. The studio resisted. Downey didn't budge. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. Scarlett Johansson later said, "He was the big brother. He always had our backs." Chris Evans said, "Downey was the center. We orbited around him." Mark Ruffalo described him as the most generous actor I've ever worked with. This wasn't strategy. It was redemption. For years, he was the liability. Now, he became the guarantor. The addict who once consumed everything was now protecting others. On set, directors saw something evolve. Between takes, Downey didn't disappear. He watched the other scenes, gave notes, adjusted timing, improvised lines to lift their performances. He curated energy. He kept morale high. When the cast struggled, Downey lifted them. When the studio pressured, Downey softened the blow. He wasn't just Iron Man, he was the immune system of the set. The role changed him. Tony Stark began as an avatar for his ego and guilt. Now Stark became something else, responsibility. And with that power came weight. More fame, more pressure, more expectation. Marvel demanded more films, sequels, spin-offs, cameos. Downey complied. But internally, he was evolving from performer to patriarch. He knew Marvel's experiment would fall apart without unity, so he became the glue. Hollywood didn't see it, fans didn't see it, but inside the walls of Marvel, cast and crew whispered something. He saved us. And soon, that instinct, that protective leadership, would be tested in a war that almost broke Marvel from within. A war Downey would start, on purpose. Leaders aren't crowned, they're challenged and survive the fight. By 2014, the MCU was unstoppable. But Marvel secretly feared one thing. Robert Downey Jr. was getting too powerful. He could sway casts, push executives, set cultural tone. So Marvel made a decision: reduce his role, minimize his influence. Enter Captain America: Civil War. Originally, Tony Stark had a tiny cameo, 10 minutes of screen time, no character arc. Marvel's agenda was simple: the universe needs to move on without him. Downey read the script. He didn't get angry, he got analytical. He walked into a meeting with Kevin Feige and the executives and said, "This isn't a movie. This is a therapy session disguised as war. If Tony doesn't break, the audience doesn't feel anything." They disagreed. They wanted a safe cameo. Downey fought, not for money, for story. He argued that Civil War must be about guilt, consequence, emotional fracture, the sins of Tony Stark returning to collect interest. Executives panicked. That version would cost more and would require renegotiating Downey's contract. So they tried to cut him out. Yes, Marvel tried to remove Robert Downey Jr. from Civil War entirely. But Feige and the directors, the Russo brothers, backed Downey. They knew he was right. So Downey did something radical. He offered leverage. Pay me what I'm worth, but also pay the cast more. Marvel blinked. They realized something terrifying. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just Iron Man. He was the narrative engine of the MCU. Civil War was rewritten. Tony becomes co-lead. Tony becomes antagonist. Tony becomes tragic mirror to Steve Rogers. The emotional climax? Tony discovering his parents were murdered and that Steve hid the truth from him. That was Downey's insistence, because Downey understood something no executive did. Heroes don't become myth by winning. They become myth by losing publicly. He sacrificed his own legacy for dramatic truth. Fans walked away loving Steve but hurting for Tony. That was intentional. Downey later said, Tony had to break so he could grow. This film is where he became something Hollywood rarely sees. A star who protects the story more than his image. Civil War was the moment Downey stopped being cast leader and became creative godfather of the MCU. But the price of that power? Weight, responsibility, loneliness. And 10 years in, the armor was getting heavy. Next, we enter the chapter where being the face of a universe begins to drain him emotionally. Myth-making is heavy. Carrying it for a decade is heavier. By 2016, Robert Downey Jr. had become the gravitational center of the MCU. Not just the star, the axis everything orbited around. What audiences never saw was the toll. His body hurt, his voice changed, his energy dipped. Each film was another layer of armor, and the world expected him to wear it forever. But Downey was the only one who understood something the studio refused to consider. Tony Stark cannot live forever. He started saying it quietly in interviews. Every myth needs an ending. It sounded playful, but he meant it literally. Behind closed doors, Marvel was planning 10 more years of Iron Man. Downey wasn't. On the set of Infinity War, he began behaving differently. He stayed longer after takes. He spent real time with Tom Holland. He gave life advice to Hemsworth and Evans. He hugged people more, especially crew. He sensed it. The end was closer than the studio understood. Then came Infinity War, where Tony Stark is the first to bleed. Look closely at the Titan battle scene. The moment Thanos stabs Tony, Downey's expression isn't pain, it's fear. Not scripted fear, a real one. This cannot be the man who dies. He's not ready yet. Infinity War ends with failure. Half the universe gone. Spider-Man dissolving in Tony's arms, and Downey breaks character for a moment. Tom Holland improvised, "I don't want to go." Downey's reaction, jaw tremble, breath crack, was not acting. For 10 years he had been preparing to lose someone again. Death always found him. River Phoenix, his daughter, Jennifer Syme. Now Tony Stark was repeating the pattern. Whatever you love, you will lose. Infinity War exhausted him. He went home knowing there must be a payoff, a redemption, a closure, and that closure could only come one way. Tony Stark must die. Marvel fought the idea. Studio heads pushed back. Fans would riot. Merchandise sales would collapse. Sequels would crumble. But Downey insisted. Endings are what give meaning. He had learned it the hard way, through real life, not fiction. Infinity War didn't break the MCU. It broke Downey open. After 10 years of carrying the world, he began preparing to lay it down. The world didn't know it yet, but Robert Downey Jr. had already chosen the ending. Legends don't end. They choose when to fall. The Russo brothers bring Downey into a quiet room. Not a studio boardroom, a private creative space. The discussion is simple on paper, impossible in reality. Tony Stark dies. Downey listens, hands clasped, the kind of posture he adopts when he is deciding something permanent. Marvel feared it. Executives hated it. Toy divisions panicked. Kevin Feige called it unthinkable. But Downey saw it differently. A story without sacrifice isn't a story. Tony's life has to cost something. He wasn't protecting an icon. He was protecting meaning. Behind the scenes, Downey rewrote scenes, quietly, surgically. He argued, Tony shouldn't beg. He shouldn't scream. He shouldn't go out heroic. He should go out human. They shot alternative endings. Tony giving a long monologue. Tony speaking to Pepper. Tony whispering to Peter. None worked. Then, during previs, the editors inserted a throwaway line, a wink to the first film. The Russos didn't think it would stick. Downey saw it. He smiled. That's it. I am Iron Man. The 4 words that created the MCU would be the 4 words that closed it. When the crew shot the final funeral sequence, Marvel didn't tell the cast it was Tony's funeral. They said it was a wedding scene to hide spoilers. But Downey knew. Watch him in that scene. He stands still, hands in pockets, the posture of a man saying goodbye. Off camera, after the final take, he didn't celebrate. He hugged people individually. He thanked the camera operators. He asked crew members about their families. And then he walked off set. No fanfare, no Iron Man music, just a man in a baseball cap leaving a myth he had carried for 11 years. And yet, the greatest scene was one fans never saw. The Russos shot a version where Tony meets his grown daughter in the afterlife. Downey watched the playback and shook his head. Beautiful, but not powerful. He's already said goodbye. The editors deleted it. Endgame shattered theaters worldwide. Audiences cried not because Tony died, but because he chose to. He didn't fall, He traded himself. This was not superhero cinema. This was tragedy, completion, closure. The prodigal son who destroyed himself in the 90s became the man who saved the biggest franchise in history by dying. Downey didn't just act the sacrifice, he believed in it. He fought for it. Because the addict inside him knew, you don't overcome the past, you redeem it. And in that moment, in that snap, in that destiny fulfilled, Robert Downey Jr. finally let his ghosts rest. Heroes die once. Icons die twice. But men resurrect endlessly. Endgame dominates the world. Robert Downey Jr. stands at the center of the most profitable film in history. Billions earned, stadium-level applause, global mourning for a fictional death. Marvel assumes the obvious. He will stay. Iron Man will return. Everything is negotiable. But Downey walks away. Not because he hates the role, because he has nothing left to prove through it. He retreats again, not into chaos, but into something rarer, silence. No rush for Marvel, no sequel sprint. He vanishes into art, fatherhood, slow mornings, Wing Chun, and home, something he never had before. But the world misunderstands silence. People call it decline. Media brands it irrelevance. Downey never cared. Because after Endgame, he wasn't fighting for relevance, he was fighting for meaning. And then life delivered a second crucible. His father, Robert Downey Sr., the mythic architect of his destruction, began dying. A documentary began filming, SR. What started as a tribute became a therapeutic autopsy. Downey didn't confront his father on camera. He listened. A man who once handed him a joint at 6, now trembling, apologetic. Not the monster, just the flawed human who didn't know how to love. Forgiveness didn't happen with speeches. It happened in presence. Downey showed up, helps him shave, shares stories, laughs with him, sits with him during the final breaths. Senior dies, and instead of collapsing, Downey does something extraordinary. He releases the film not as vengeance or confession, but as closure. Hollywood watches in disbelief. The addict's son became the caretaker father. But fate wasn't done. Christopher Nolan calls Oppenheimer. Louis Strauss, a character defined by ego, insecurity, vengeance, everything Downey had spent his life escaping. It would require restraint, silence, subtle contempt, and old scars. Downey disappears into the role. The industry loses its mind. He wins every major award, and then, March 10th, 2024, the Dolby Theater rises. Again, Downey walks to the stage, but this time something is different. He isn't boasting, performing, or proving. His speech is strange, playful but grounded, funny but entirely unpretentious. Not the prince returning to his throne, a man standing on his own ashes with peace. This wasn't validation. It was punctuation. A circle closed. The addict, the inmate, the liability, the ghost, the kingmaker, the godfather, the fallen hero, the resurrected artist. People call him Iron Man, but the truth is sharper. Robert Downey Jr. is the only actor in modern cinema who didn't just survive his arc, he earned it. Not through talent alone, but through annihilation, humbling, discipline, love, service, and surrender. His life says one thing: your past is real, but not final. The world may bury you, but you choose if you stay dead. Resurrection isn't magic. It's responsibility. That's why his story matters. Because somewhere, someone watching this is convinced they've ruined their life too deeply to return. Downey stands at the podium holding gold and whispers, without saying a word, "It's never too late to rewrite your ending."